Change your heart, change your life, change the planet.
Hey everybody, Tim Van Orden, coming to you from Bald Mountain in Bennington. And it was a cold, stinging rain on top of the mountain. And now that I'm heading down, I can finally feel my fingers again. It was pretty sketchy up there. And as I'm going along, I have been having all these thoughts about some comments that I've been getting on my recent videos and other videos as well. It seems that some people feel the need to shame me or to try to fix me for sharing openly, or as some of you are saying, vulnerably. I'm just sharing my truth. I don't necessarily see it as vulnerable, it's just what is. And I think there's value in it, so I talk about it. But there are quite a few people out there that are either offended by this, or threatened by this, or they simply see it as an opportunity to esteem themselves higher than me. Like, thank God I'm not that baby crying to a video camera alone in the woods on YouTube. You know, at least I'm a real man. And there's this tendency to push feelings away, especially men's feelings. So I want to talk about what that looks like in our brains and bodies and how people tend to respond to it. We've got a layered system of being, and it's talked about in a pretty inappropriate way, I think, by most pop psychology books, in that you've got a reptilian brain, you've got a mammalian brain built on top of that, and then you've got this primate brain, and then finally you've got the human icing on the cake. Our cognitive capacities, our capacities to step outside of time and simulate futures and reinvent pasts, and to exist in this abstract narrative space. And that's the pinnacle of human achievement. And so much of our culture throughout the ages has celebrated that aspect of being human and deemed everything else as inferior. That the passions are inferior, or this reptilian and even mammalian brain are inferior, and they're viruses that hijack the brain, and they stop us from experiencing pure reason or pure logic, pure compassion, and that evil comes from these so-called primitive areas of human existence or experience, and that good comes from our more logical human brain. And it's just not true. It's more that we have this multi-layered, integrated system of being. And yes, you do have hardware in your brain that's built to respond to perceived threats. That's true. But it's not reptilian. It's human. It's been modified and updated, and it's evolved along with our cognitive capacities. It's not as if that part of our brain stopped evolving and stopped developing. It evolved to work in conjunction with our so-called human cognition and reason. Same with the so-called mammalian brain, or what most people call the limbic system, the emotional brain. That also has continued to evolve right along with our cognitive capacities. Our entire brain and body have been evolving together. And as they do so, these so-called primitive parts of the brain gain new features, gain new insights. Like the insula, for instance. The insula is related to disgust, and generally about olfactory disgust, things that smell bad. So when you smell something and you recoil in horror because it's awful, that's your insula. But the insula also fires when we are disgusted by narrative, when we are disgusted by culture, when we are disgusted by things that are only significant inside of a cultural context. They're not disgusting in any objective way. So the whole brain has moved together, and it works in a highly integrated fashion. And it's not like parts are working all by themselves. certain parts can come online with greater intensity, and certain parts can get more blood flow at particular times, but they don't stay that way for long. It moves around. There's just constant shifting of what parts of the brain are doing what at what time. So, long description of brain architecture, but it's important to know this because when we shame our feelings, or when we shame the feelings of others, we're stuck in that old model of thinking about the brain, that feeling is a choice, that feeling is something that you want to do because you're just a weak character. You want to ruminate. You want to whine about what's going on and feel sorry for yourself, and that you're making this fear come up in you, and you're making this lust or attraction or attachment or whatever it is, that you're in charge of that you, the so-called you, the cognitive narrative you, that it's in charge and it has complete and total control over what you feel and how you behave. And modern neuroscience has shown us again and again and again and again, that's not true. Not even close. And there's all kinds of discussions on free will now, like, do we even have it? And the conversation seems to be pointing towards, no, we don't. And people are saying we have free won't instead, that we can't change what arises in us, but we can inhibit it to a degree. So if you're feeling something, it's because your brain and body, I forgot to mention the body in this, the body is a huge component of your experience and your cognition and how you map and model the world. Because it's all about the body. The brain without a body is useless. So the brain is doing everything that it can do in order to facilitate your body, and therefore the body talks to the brain, and there's this feedback loop where they communicate with each other. And you can't control what's happening inside of your body or what happens outside to your body. And yet we live in a culture that believes that you should be controlling these things. And we look down on people that have addictions, and we look down on people that are sexually promiscuous, and we look down on people for being human, and for having different personality traits. If you're an introvert, you are inferior to an extrovert. If you are open to experience, you're superior to people that are closed, etc. If you are stable, you're superior to people that are neurotic. And these are all personality dimensions that psychology measures. So there's a lot of cultural bias in how we view each other and what we believe one's capacity for behavior should be. If you've ever worked with children, or maybe you were a child at one point, you'll see that you can tell them what to do, or you can tell them what not to do, again and again and again, and that doesn't mean that they're going to do what you say or not do what you tell them not to do. How many times have you either been a parent or seen a parent in a grocery store say to a child, "How many times do I have to tell you?" Well, a lot. A lot. Maybe you have to tell them again and again for decades. That's probably the truth. And what's going on here is that, especially with new modern parents that believe in gently and calmly discussing things with their children, they're using that logical narrative space to disassociate from emotion and speak calmly, rationally, and logically to a child that doesn't have that part of their brain fully developed yet, not even close. That part of the brain isn't finished developing for most people until they're about 25 years old, on average. So trying to have that conversation with a child, they may understand the words, and they may nod in agreement that they understand the words, but because that part of their brain is not fully developed, it has little effect on behavior and has little effect on how they perceive the world, and you'll just see them engaging in the same thing a few minutes later. And it's like, that child is willful, or that child doesn't listen, or that child doesn't respect me. And it's like, no, you don't understand a child's brain. And you're speaking to the wrong part. You're speaking to a part that's not in charge. It's like calling up a company because you have a product that's defective. And the person answers the phone, "Hello, how can I help you?" And instead of saying, "Who do I talk to about getting this item fixed?" you just start telling the person the story and laying into them. And then after 20 minutes of sharing your story, they're like, well, let me transfer you to the department that deals with those issues. And you're like, yeah! That's kind of what it's like. A parent having that calm conversation with a child isn't talking to the part of the child that's actually in charge. And the part that's in charge speaks through emotion. They speak through gesture. They speak through tone. They speak through touch. And we got along really, really well for most of human evolution without those conversations. So what makes people think that suddenly now that's the best solution? It isn't. It's a bad solution. And it just gets the parent to think that the child is a bad child because they're not respecting the language of the parent. So I think this is an issue that goes pretty deep throughout our culture, and perhaps many cultures. I think lots of cultures have their own versions of this, but here in the US, again, especially for men, we think that, okay, children should listen, but once you've grown up, once that part of your brain is developed, well, then you have no excuse. But just because that part of the brain is fully developed doesn't mean that it's in charge now. It's still not in charge. You had Plato talking about a chariot with horses and a charioteer, the horses being the passions, and that reason is the charioteer, and that's you, and you need to control the horses. Then you had David Hume coming along and talking about the elephant and the rider, and regardless of what the rider does, the elephant is a lot bigger and a lot stronger, and it's going to do what it wants. And the rider is essentially just going along for the ride, all while thinking it's in charge. And when the elephant goes in a direction, the rider simply comes up with a reason as to why it wanted to go in that direction, so that it feels like it has free will. So free will is actually something that comes after a choice has already been made, which is why neuroscientists tell us that we actually don't have it. Because we reason about things after our brain and body have already chosen to do it, without really consulting with us, our conscious narrative or self-concept. So, what arises in you, arises in you. And you don't really have control over that. And to shame people for feeling certain things is just, it's ludicrous. It's missing the point. It's not helpful at all. And it actually does harm because you make people feel shame because they think, well, everybody else must be doing it. I'm the only one that can't do this. I'm somehow broken. I'm defective. Look at all these other people not feeling things and in control of their lives, and the reality is that's not the case. They're just faking it really well. So another thing that comes up in these conversations is, all right, Tim, what do you have to bitch about? You're a white man living in the United States. Seriously, you have problems? Well, yeah, from that lens, from that perspective, it does look like I really shouldn't have any problems. But again, that part of my brain, the part of my brain that can do that analysis, that can do that comparison, it's not in charge. It's not calling the shots, and it's not the part that's choosing to feel a certain way. So the part of me that is causing these feelings to rise in me, the part of me that is mourning or grieving or experiencing loss or depression, I'm not in charge of those parts. I can nurture those parts. I can gently guide those parts, but still, they do what they want to do. They may listen to me or they may not listen to me. It took me till 4 o'clock in the afternoon to get out on this run today. I was having a really rough time getting myself moving. By the time 4 o'clock rolled around, I eventually convinced myself to take some steps, but the guy that runs every day, it almost didn't happen. And that's common because this part is not in charge. So if I'm feeling a certain way, it's that the rest of my body is built to process a local environment. It's not built to process a global environment. It's not built to watch the news and to understand what's happening to different people around the world. That's not what it's for. This is all brand new. Our brains and bodies are built for very local environments with very small groups of people. And so therefore, anything that you're feeling is related to your local environment and your local group. But now we can feel bad about things that are happening across the world, or we can feel bad about ourselves because of things that are happening across the world. And neither one is local. Neither one has anything to do with our body or being in this environment that is taking steps here. So we become ineffectual. We get shut down by things that have nothing to do with our local experience or local existence. And this is my argument against this first world problems. I think it's offensive to say that because it lacks compassion, number one, and that compassion is an understanding of what it means to be a human, to have a body and a brain outside of whatever narrative construct you've created. You know, we live in a world now of these complex narratives about culture and society and the roles of different people, and none of that has anything to do with what it really means to be human. These are all chains that get added to us that weigh us down and confuse us and get us to leave our bodies and to enter these narratives full time. And look at what's happening. How many people are actually in their body and choose their body in each moment and say, it's my body, I'm going to take care of it, I'm going to be good to it, I'm going to treat it well, I'm going to nurture it, and I'm going to let it move at the speed that it wants to, rather than me always doing what I want and my body paying the price for it. But hey, I deserve it. So to shame someone for feeling loss or feeling grief or feeling depression in the midst of a culture of abundance like I live in, I mean, just look at the abundance of natural trails that I show you all the time. I mean, I got it made in so many ways, but that doesn't stop my body and being from experiencing hurt and pain locally in comparison to my environment, in comparison to the people that are close to me. That's all that matters to 98% of your brain and your entire body. Everything else is abstract. But we've been told that that abstraction is the only thing that's real, when in reality, that's the thing that's totally made up. So there are some thoughts on that, about just allowing yourself to feel what you're feeling. You're not in control of it, so let it rise, nurture it, give it a hug, listen to it. You don't have to make up stories about it, but allow it to be there. Don't feel bad. Let it run its course. It's talking to you. It's sending you a message. And when you don't get the message, you don't heal properly. And then it just gets worse and worse and worse, and you close off more and more and feel more and more shame and put up more and more of a front, and it just doesn't end well. So there are my thoughts on that. Hopefully there's some value in there for you, something that maybe piqued your interest, something that hopefully you have a comment about. Let me know. And if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. And if you like this channel, subscribe and click on the bell so you find out when I'm posting videos. And if you want to support more conversations like this, come on over to Patreon. And $1 or $2 a month, and you really help me out and allow me to continue making content. And I greatly appreciate it. All right, I'll see you soon. Bye.